All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Devin Lau, and I'm the Assistant Director for Yale Center Beijing. And welcome to everybody joining us from China or wherever else you may be in the world, I guess. Uh, Before we begin, I'd like to ask a favor. We've found that it's difficult to talk via Zoom unless we know who we're talking to. So if you are willing, we'd ask that you do turn on your camera just so that we can have a sense of who we're talking to. And that would be very helpful, especially as Professor Shapiro begins his talk. So just a quick introduction. Yale Center Beijing was established in 2014 as a gathering place for leaders from Yale, China, and the rest of the world to dialogue about the important issues that we're facing in the world. And so we bring the best Yale professors to China to share from all fields of study, from medicine to philosophy, economics, science, art, everything. But obviously in the time of a global pandemic, we're not able to meet in person, but we are still very lucky to have an online platform that allows us to invite distinguished professors to come. And so today we are very honored to be joined by Professor Ian Shapiro. Professor Shapiro is Sterling Professor of Political Science at Yale. Originally from South Africa, he received both his JD and his PhD from Yale, where he's taught since 1984. And he served as a chair of the Poli-Sci department from 99 to 2004. He's also served as the inaugural director of the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies from 2004 to 2019. So he just stepped down from that position. And of course, most Yale students know him best from his very popular course, Moral Foundations of Politics, better known as MoFoPo, which, if you're interested, is available online on Coursera, as are his most recent Devane lectures on power and politics in today's world, both of which I recommend. Professor Shapiro, I think he has an incredible range of expertise, and he's the rare type of scholar who is equally adept at working with theory as well as practical application, as his book and subject of today's talk will show us. He's written extensively on democracy, justice, methods of social inquiry, on and on. So we're very excited to have him today to share about a particularly pertinent topic. And so please join me in welcoming Professor Shapiro.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you all for joining me. It's early morning here in New Haven, and I know it's a lot later there. So the talk today, The Wolf at the Door, is this book that I wrote with Michael Gratz, who is a law professor at Columbia Law School, used to be a law professor here at Yale. And it's a book about our current crisis, not the COVID crisis, of course, but the COVID crisis has exposed the underlying issues that we do talk about in the book. And I guess the central theme of the book is twofold. The one is substantive, and one is about methods, if you like. So the substantive claim in the book is that long-term employment insecurity is a much more politically potent problem in the emerging and in the established capitalist systems, and in all the older capitalist democracies, than inequality. We've heard decades of complaining about what the top 1% has, and that we're in a new Gilded Age, and that the real problem, the core of the problem, is growth of inequality. If you look at what actually concerns most people, when they do compare themselves to others, they tend to compare themselves to people who are close to them, so that workers do not compare themselves to the top 1%. They compare themselves to similarly situated workers. But more important than that is the long-term insecurity that 30 or 40 years ago, people would finish their education and get a job, which they would then keep for 30 or 40 years and then retire and live on a pension. Today, an 18-year-old in the US must expect to change jobs 12 to 15 times in their lifetime. And so the world of the future is a world in which people are going to be perpetually insecure about employment. And our book focuses centrally on that. Then the methodological point is that most writing on this subject either focuses on the policy or it focuses on the politics. But unless you can have good policies that can actually be achieved politically, it seems like a waste of everybody's time. And so what we spend a lot of time in the sorts of policies we talk about, both in making the case that they would address the problems, but also in thinking about what the political coalitions would be to actually achieve them and implement them so that they could be feasibly imagined to actually happen. And so that's where, for us, where the rubber meets the road, if you like. We really want policies that actually can be implemented. This book is principally focused on the US and some of the other rich democracies. So that's the central focus of the book. And so we're not interested, you know, in things like Thomas Piketty calling for a global wealth tax. Good luck with that. We think that while health insurance is a huge problem in the US, Medicare for all is politically infeasible. So let me dig into that a little bit and give us as an example of the sort of thing we talk about in the book. I don't want to talk endlessly. I'm not going to talk about the whole book, but let me talk about health insurance as an example of the way in which long-term insecurity is worsened in the US and produces the kind of virulent populist politics we've been seeing. Then the sort of proposal we make to address unemployment, to address lack of health insurance. So as you probably know, in the US, most people, about 180 million people, get their health insurance through their employment. But of course, if you're going to keep losing your job, you will be in danger of losing your health insurance. And so and the US is the only advanced capitalist democracy that doesn't have universal health insurance. Currently, there are about 28 million people who don't have health insurance. And so we have a very costly and inefficient system because they go to emergency rooms for routine medical treatment where they have to not be turned away. That gets fed into medical inflation by the costs being diffused through the system. It's not the only reason the American system's inefficient, but it's one of them. So why do we have this system? You know, it's not like Americans are special or different. Why do we have this employer-based system? Well, and why don't we have a universal system? If you go back to World War II, during World War II, we had wage and price controls in the US, but there was a lot of demand for labor because so many people were fighting in the war. And so the way employers got around this was by giving benefits because they couldn't raise wages. And one of the principal benefits they gave was health insurance. And this is when the employer-based system got established and embedded. Other obstacles to a universal system are that in 1965, we created Medicare. This is Lyndon Johnson, the Johnson administration, which gave him universal insurance to people over the age of 65. But then that's great for them, and it's a great program. but it splits the political coalition to demand a universal system. You know, because now you've got a big chunk of the people who would be demanding coverage already have it. One group through employment, the elderly through Medicare, and so there isn't a big demand. Not only that, there are people who think, well, if it became universal, the elderly people worry that their coverage would get diluted because it would be more expensive to cover everybody. So there isn't the pressure there for it, and you can see just from these two examples that there'll be a lot of blocking coalitions, blocking political coalitions to stop universal health care. So for example, unions have often bargained for health insurance for their members. They have opposed Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All proposal. People who have employer-based coverage now think that they're happy with it, even if they don't realize that it's likely to get worse over time, or they may lose it because they're going to lose their jobs. And then you have the elderly. One of the most powerful interest groups in America is the AARP, Association of Retired People. Not only are they not pushing for universal health insurance, they have reasons to be worried about it because it could erode. Yeah. So we don't have, for all these reasons, we don't have support for just going straight to universal system. And that's why I think the candidates in the primaries who were pushing that ran into so much trouble. So what could we do? What we propose is what we call bottom-up Medicare expansion. So currently, if most people can be on their parents' insurance until age 26. So we propose first adding an option for people from 26 to 30 to buy into Medicare. That would be cheap because young people aren't generally sick. It's elderly people get sick. And then they could keep it as they got older. So it would take 15 to 20 years before you finally were covering most of the uncovered people in this way. And we would also create an option for others to buy in to Medicare at subsidized rates. And this would be available to the kinds of people who might 2 months ago have thought they were perfectly happy with their employer-based insurance and are now among the 40 million unemployed. They would be able to buy in as well at subsidized rates. So this is an example of how we try and do politics and policy together, because what it means is if you add people at the bottom who are cheap to add, they will then not want to lose their health insurance. So they'll become part of the coalition to defend this gradually expanding system. Likewise, if you allow vulnerable people to buy into the program at their point of vulnerability, they too will then become part of the political coalition for keeping it. And that'll build pressure on politicians to sustain and enhance the system. So that's the kind of, I'm just talking about medical insurance. We have 6 or 7 different policy proposals we discuss in the book, but we do it in the same kind of way. We look at how we got to this situation that produces so much insecurity, and what sorts of policies could be put in place for which political support could be built, and so they could actually make a difference over time. If we fail to do that, as we have failed, particularly since the financial crisis of 2008, you're going to get more and more virulent populist politics, because the people who've been made so insecure by the way in which capitalist economies operate today are going to become even more so. And you're going to have people like Trump promising them policies, protectionism, protectionism won't help any of these people. In fact, now we know most of the jobs are actually going to technology, not to globalization. So they're going to be mobilized for the sort of vicious politics that we've been seeing. So that's what our book is aimed at. And I think that's probably, at this point, I should stop and maybe let people ask questions or comment. And then we could take it from there.
Great, thank you so much. So that's a good introduction to sort of the general aim of the book. People, if you guys have specific questions about either what Professor Shapiro just shared or other kind of related questions based on the topic of the book, feel free to either use the chat function in the bottom to write down your question, and then we can call on you, or you can also use the raise hand function, which is underneath the participants tab. And we have a good size but fairly intimate group today, so we should be able to get to lots of questions. Yeah, so please don't be shy. Feel free to ask questions via the group chat or raising your hand. And usually it takes people a while to warm up. Oh, great.
I see one chat. Why
Obamacare did not work.
Okay, why Obamacare did not work. So this is actually the topic of the talk I'm giving next week. Is it next week on
next
week
month.
part? So I'm going to talk in detail about that next time, but the short answer is America has very weak political parties. The Constitution was designed to prevent having parties at all, and it was only later that parties were grafted onto the system. And so they're very susceptible, first of all, to lobbyists. And when when they were writing by the way, it's worth pointing out that Obama's attempt to create universal health insurance certainly was not the first. The Truman administration tried, the Eisenhower administration tried, Johnson, I already said, put in Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid is insurance for poor people administered through the states, but it's also subsidized by the federal government. They created Medicare for people over 65. The Clinton administration tried. So people have tried over and over again and have run into powerful opposition from the medical establishment and from the pharmaceutical establishment. That opposition has basically hobbled Obamacare. And in particular, the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance industry were both opposed to a universal system. The pharmaceutical industry was opposed to the idea that the only way they could get costs under control was for the government to negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical industry. And they made it clear in 29 and 2010 when the bill was being written that they would oppose it, and if it had any provision that the government could negotiate drug prices with the insurance industry. So the Obama administration backed off. But then the other part of it was what they called the public option. And the idea of the public option was that twofold. One was that in parts of the country where there would only be one provider, there would be, the government would also be there to compete with the one provider, so you wouldn't have a monopoly situation. But the other was that if there was no provider, people would be able to get insurance from the government. And obviously the insurance companies didn't want that, because they intuited correctly that if you create a public option, it's a gradual way to Medicare for all, because people would, just like the proposal in our book, it would be a way in which over time you could get to a universal system, which would put them out of business. So this is an example of weak parties. To pass a bill in the United States Senate, you need 60 votes, because otherwise any senator can so-called filibuster the bill and stop it. And they had exactly 60 votes. But one of them came from Joseph Lieberman, our senator in Connecticut. And Connecticut is the headquarters of the insurance industry. And they give huge amounts of money to, Lieberman's retired now, but they gave Lieberman huge amounts of money when he was in the Senate. And they said to him 10 days before the bill was going to pass, that he had to oppose the public option. And he did. He said he would not vote for it unless the public option was taken out, and they had to take it out. So that's the reason it failed. But on the other hand, it's worth saying that it did increase coverage. About 20 million people are insured through Obamacare who were not previously insured. So it's not that it failed completely, but it really is a Band-Aid on a very bad system. I'm not actually seeing the chats here.
That's all right. What I'll do is I'll unmute people as the questions come up so that they can ask you in person.
There's three chats. It says 3 chats, but I'm not actually seeing the chats for some reason.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll unmute the next question so that they can ask directly.
Okay.
Okay, so 11 is the username. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Participant with the username 11. Okay, let's skip over to the next one then. Gavin. And Gavin, before you ask your question, I will do a quick plug. We will have another event with Professor Shapiro where he will talk specifically about responsible parties. But feel free to ask your question for now. Let's see.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, hi, Professor Shapiro. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Gavin. I really enjoyed your book on responsible parties. So my question is, do you think that the situation will be different if the US operates in a parliamentary system, like what happened in the UK and their potential and their passage of the national, what's it called, the National Healthcare Services?
Well, so that is really more a question for next week, but the short answer is yes. If you look at how the National Health Service was created in Britain, there was during World War II, they had I told you the story about World War II in the US. It gave us our employer-based system because of the price controls problem. What happened in the UK, there was something called the Beveridge Report, which was basically a blueprint for the post-war British welfare state that included universal health insurance. And Neuer and Bevan, who is actually one of the people on the far left of the Labour Party, came in, in 1945, the Conservatives lost the election, Churchill lost the election, and Labour came in. They immediately in one fell swoop, created the National Health NHS. It was full up and operating by 1947. Very comprehensive health insurance. In that not only is the insurance universal, but the provision is universal. So the doctors work for the government. Whereas, say, the Canadian system is universal insurance, but still private provision. So the doctors are not part of the system. But the British system, very, very powerful government. The British Medical Association was strongly opposed to it, and they lost in that battle. But interestingly, this was the Labour government 1945 to 51. Then they lost, and the Conservatives came back in. Churchill, his last round as prime minister from 51 to 56. Many people said, oh, now the Conservatives are going to get rid of this. In fact, they expanded it. Why? Because by then it was established and entrenched and hugely popular. To this day, it is the most popular institution in Britain. It's more popular even than the Queen, who's the most popular person. And so, you know, if you look, the Conservative government in the 1950s didn't actually expanded it. And in the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher came in and was rolling back the welfare state on many other fronts, she didn't touch the national health system. And if you look at the recent fight over Brexit, the pro-Brexit people were running around saying, oh, the money we bring back from Brussels, we can put into the national health system. So it's a very popular institution in Britain, and it's completely the opposite trajectory of what we have in the US. But they have weakened their parties in recent decades, but that certainly in the 1940s and 50s, they had parties that could do that.
All right, let's see if we can get 11 one more time. Hi, are you there? 11? Okay, well, so the question is, would you agree that the current problem in the US is mainly attributed to the inequality of classes?
So we don't think that's the case. So inequality is very extreme in the US. It's more extreme than in the other rich democracies. And it's back to the level of 100 years ago. If you look at just about any measure of inequality in the US over the last 100 years, you basically get a U shape. So you go from the Gilded Age, very high levels of inequality, and then after World War II, you get very much lower levels of inequality. And then since the 1970s, it's basically been going up. And we all know from Piketty and others what the main reasons for that are. Returns to capital exceed the rate of economic growth, and returns to labor. Productivity growth has been shifting work to to China, to places, globalization has been shifting work to wherever wages are lowest. And increasingly in recent years and in, I think, future years, it's going to be shifting jobs to technology. So the returns from productivity increases are not going to labor. They're going basically to owners of capital at much higher levels. We argue that that is a problem, but it's not the core problem. The core problem is the insecurity, the employment insecurity that people are facing. That they, as I said at the beginning, an 18-year-old American today must expect to change jobs 12 to 15 times in their lifetime. Now, if you're on the right side of the tech revolution, that's not frightening. Maybe you go to Yale, you become a consultant, you work for McKinsey for a while, you maybe blow through a few startups, then maybe you go to business school, and all the while you're happy changing jobs and you're building up, your 401k. By the time you're 30, maybe you have, $2 million in there. Those people are not, for them, it's wonderful. It's opportunity. But for people on the other side of the tech revolution, it's terrifying because their communities are collapsing, their jobs are disappearing, their children are facing downward mobility. They even before the current crisis, when the unemployment statistics said, 4% unemployment, what that concealed was that people had gone from much better jobs to much worse jobs. So somebody who had, been working in an auto plant or a furniture manufacturer who had been there for 10 or 15 years, had some status, was a respected person in the community, is now working at McDonald's or as an orderly in a nursing home, or they're working part-time in 2 or 3 such jobs. Those are the angry people. Those are the frightened people. Those are the people that can get mobilized. And what's bothering them is not, all the data shows, and this is core about it's not inequality, it's their own insecurity and their downward mobility. The sense, we know that what psychologists call loss aversion is much more potent than not making gains. If this is Kahneman and Tversky, I'm sure some of you know, Kahneman got the Nobel Prize for this idea, but the prospect of losing something you had or you expected you were going to have is much more potent to you than not getting things that you never had in the first place. This is also what another Nobel Prize winner, Thaler, got called the endowment effect. Once it's yours, or you think it should be yours, and it's being taken away. This is why Trump's slogan was so brilliant: "Make America Great Again." The again signals something's been taken away from you and I'm going to bring it back, right? And so people are much more focused on those things actually than inequality. It tends to be academics, people on the left of the Democratic Party, and activists who talk about inequality. But if you look at the 63 million people who voted for Trump, inequality is just not, it's not their issue. Trump never talked about inequality. He brazenly said, "I'm a billionaire." He never said he was going to make them rich. Even Reagan said, "I want an America where everybody can get rich." Trump never said that. He just said, "Your jobs are going to be taken away and I'm going to get them back." So I think it's to miss the real politics of insecurity, to become so preoccupied with inequality. To be sure, our proposals would involve reducing inequality to pay for them. So it's not that we wouldn't want to address some inequalities, but it's not the core of the matter.
That's, to me, pretty fascinating, given that, being at Yale and surrounded by, ivory tower. What do you think, how big is this gap of understanding between the people who, you talked about the McKinseys and all that? Why does it seem like it's so hard for us to understand the mindset of people who are not in that situation? And I guess the corollary to that is, you mentioned the brilliance of the slogan of Trump. I guess this is a question that a lot of people ask: is Trump actually brilliant, or is he crazy? Like, what, from your kind of observations, do you feel like he actually is doing things because he knows what he's doing and sort of tapping into that, or Is he lucky?
I think he was lucky. I think he started with this message, and he saw that it resonated, and he got lots of positive feedback, and he realized very early on that by attacking the elites who, you know, one of the big mistakes after the financial crisis was to bail out the banks and ignore these people, ignore the people who are losing their homes, ignore the people who were being shuttled into worse and worse jobs and temporary employment and so on. And, you know, it's not what we did after the Depression. After the Depression, we created the New Deal. We poured resources into creating Social Security, protecting unions, education, public works, infrastructure, the WPA, you know, all of that stuff that the Roosevelt administration did. Why did they do it? Partly they thought it was the right thing to do, but also because there was 20% unemployment. There was an alternative communist system out there competing for the hearts and minds of American workers. And there were, you know, if you look at the AFL especially and the CIO, there was a lot of communist influence there. And the elites were afraid that the battle for hearts and minds might be lost and the Communist Party would get a foothold. And so it was partly to head that off. You know, after the collapse of communism, capitalism's the only game in town. It's much easier to sort of be out of sight, out of mind. You know, these people have no place, you know, what are they going to do? So I think that it was complacency on the part of elites, protecting themselves. And you say, you know, why are people so ignorant of this? We live now in a what my colleague Doug Ray called a segmented democracy, silos. People live in silos. We have, you know, massive racial segregation in this country. We have segmented media markets. People on the right get their information from Fox News. People on the left get it from MSNBC, or people get it on Facebook or wherever. People talk to people like themselves. Another finding by the psychologists is if you talk to people like yourself, you tend to become more extreme because you reinforce, it's just groupthink, you reinforce one another's prejudices. 40 years ago, everybody watched the same news. Now people don't watch the same news now. They get, you know, because of first cable and then satellites and now, you know, all the various forms of Twitter and so forth, increasingly segmented. I mean, you talk about Yale students. You know, they live in New Haven. There's massive urban poverty. Most Yale students never go anywhere near it. They don't even see it.
All right, looks like people are warming up and there's more questions. Yao Chen Zhu.
Thank you, Professor Shapiro. My question is about like a proposal for public option for Medicare. So my major concern is that you create the public option, and my interpretation is that it can accumulate to a more universal one. However, as the Industrial Revolution goes on and on, my fear is that the proposal that you propose cannot have the same speed of the Industrial Revolution that revolutionized all the industry. So my question is how to let the vested interest group in US to make compromise. So in essence, that we can have more room for the policymakers rather than to make such limited policies in the US.
Well, the insurance companies are not going to compromise. I mean, you know, Obama compromised with the pharmaceutical companies by by essentially he got them to support Obamacare by backing off the negotiation of drug prices. But that just keeps driving up the costs of insurance because you pay 3 or 4 times as much money for the same drugs in the US as you can buy in Canada for, you know, much less, just because of monopoly pricing by, right. So that's a kind of compromise. You could say it's a compromise, but it's also a devil's bargain, because then, you know, when you see these people costing out Medicare for all at $40 trillion, they're pricing in now much higher cost for pharmaceuticals. Or if you think compromising with the insurance companies, there's no compromise there, because if you get to a universal system, it'll put them out of business. So they're not going to compromise on that. So they have to actually be beaten. And the only way you can beat them is to build up a stronger political coalition to do it than currently exists. And so that's why we said, start at the bottom where it's cheap. 26 to 30-year-olds, it wouldn't cost that much to let them buy into Medicare. So it's saleable politically. Biden should be running on that now. And then if you know, the other big lack of demand is, as I said, it's people who think they're happy with their health insurance because they've got it through employers. But what they don't realize is that that health insurance is not stable, partly because it's getting more and more expensive. So their employers are downgrading it, what it'll cover, increasing co-pays, buying cheaper plans. So they're going to get less and less happy with it. And then, more important, a lot of them have lost it in the last 2 months. And so those kind of people are going to be very easy to run on that politically right now, because those kind of people feel the wolf at the door. You know, they don't have if they get, 40% of Americans say that this is before the current crisis. 40% of Americans said that if they had to find $400 for a medical emergency, they couldn't do it without putting it on a credit card that they wouldn't be able to pay off at the end of the month. $400. 40% of Americans. That's a measure of insecurity. And now, not having, I'm sure it's more than 40% of Americans, but, this is a world which is so far from our everyday experience that we don't understand it.
That's quite the statistic.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a question here from Peter Yu.
Hello, Professor. Thank you very much for a great meeting today. So my question is, do you think there is a very strong correlation between intergenerational inequality and the insecurity of jobs? And the second part is, do you think education...
I missed what you said.
Pardon?
I missed what you said. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So basically, there are 3 parts of my question. So the first part is, do you think there is a very strong correlation between intergenerational inequality and the insecurity of jobs? And the second part is, do you think education could be used as a capital to deal with the problem of inequality? And the third part actually links to the current pandemic situation. So because of this pandemic situation, there will be less and less endorsement for the university. So do you think this will make the intergenerational inequality more served? And also, how do you think government and schools should deal with such a problem? Thank you very much.
Well, that's about 6 questions. Let me just touch on the education one, because I see one on the chat that I want to address. about Andrew Yang. Who's that from? Sally. But so Peter, on the education, so that is another big part of our, one of our proposals is we argue that there needs to be something called universal adjustment assistance, which is the days when you could finish your education at age 16 if you didn't go to college, or 21 if you went to college, and then work in one job for your whole life are gone. People are going to need perpetual re-education, retraining. And so in our book, we have a chapter on how this would work. The US is far behind. The gold standard for this kind of thing is Denmark, countries like that, where they have very sophisticated programs to retrain people whose jobs have become obsolete. And we think that precisely because of all the insecurity of people who are losing their jobs and see that their children are losing their jobs, it is possible to build a coalition for that. Can I address this question that Sally put about Andrew Yang, because I see others are interested in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a universal basic income idea. People, this is made famous by the Belgian philosopher Philippe von Parijs. If you look at his universal basic income network, you can read more about it than you're going to want to know. But the idea is that everybody gets a basic income grant, regardless of employment. And would this address insecurity? What we argue, it's politically not feasible, because the minute you look at it closely, what you find is that, Andrew Yang said, oh, there's great support for this across the ideological spectrum, and you can find right-wingers like Charles Murray support it, but also people on the far left support it. But what he doesn't tell you is that's deceptive, because the people on the right support replacing the welfare state with it, and the people on the left support supplementing the welfare state with it. And of course, if you got, the Murray and other proposals mean getting rid of Medicare, getting rid of Obamacare, you have to buy medical insurance in the private market out of that grant, getting rid of Social Security. Whereas the people on the left want to, just treat it as one more program. So there isn't really a coalition for this. And if you look in European countries where they've tried to push this more than in the US, it runs into very powerful blocking coalitions, including unions, by the way. So in Switzerland, they had a referendum on it, or something like got voted down by 70%. There have been small experiments with it in Scandinavian countries, and it hasn't garnered much support. So I think it's actually a fantasy.
There are two more questions in the chat that we haven't addressed, but maybe I'll sort of lump them together and ask them in a more kind of macro sense of the sweeping notion of populism or nationalism that we find throughout the world right now for the last couple of years. What would you attribute that to what we've been talking about in terms of insecurity? Is that sort of a manifestation of that? And I guess your general views on that in terms of how that positively or negatively affects individual countries, and then I guess globally as well.
Yes. And the short answer is yes. So if you look at in Europe, I think just as here after the financial crisis, the elites took care of themselves and largely ignored the people who were most harmed by the fallout from the financial crisis. And, Angela Merkel was stunned when she said, of course, Germany's going to take refugees. She was stunned at the backlash. The populist politicians propose solutions that aren't going to work. It's another matter, because it's the way they can mobilize people. They can say, oh, it's the Mexicans who are taking your jobs in the U.S., or it's the Polish plumbers. In Britain, they're always attacking the Polish plumbers, coming and taking plumbers' jobs in Britain. It's all nonsense, but it's the way you create somebody to despise. I think that what all of the elites misread after the financial crisis was how much damage it did to the image of technocrats. Because up until 2008, it was, the capitalism's the only game in town. We know how to manage it. This is an up escalator for the whole world, the Washington consensus. Everybody's got to climb aboard. They called it neoliberalism at home, Washington consensus abroad. It was basically privatization, deregulation, and free trade. And, and then it all came crashing down. And the elites didn't realize how much their own legitimacy had been blown up by the fact that they had created this huge mess. And so, when Michael Gove, during the Brexit referendum, went on television and said, the people of this country are sick of experts, that resonated with the same. British voters, the same thing. All the prosperities in London, the per capita income in the north of England is lower than Mississippi. You've got the same kind of people hurting, just like in the American South. And those people completely ignored by the elites. And so I think it plays out differently because they have different kind of political systems and so on. But the backlash against refugees, Brexit, all the backlash against the EU in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, it's largely a response to the same kind of phenomenon.
So then what is the solution, or how do we bridge that massive divide between the populists and sort of the intellectual elites?
By pursuing policies that are going to address their real problems. And at the core of that is policies that are going to address the long-term employment insecurity of these people. That is unprecedented and real, and it's going to continue. And the failure to do that is going to produce more of the kind of politics that we've been seeing.
So practical solutions over just the rhetorical kind of battles that we see.
It's not that they're not rhetorical. They're terrible. They are counterproductive. They're impractical. You can stop immigration. It's just going to ruin the economy, and it's not going to help. It's not going to help these people who've lost their jobs in Ohio. I wish it was rhetorical only. It's not. And all this focus on identity politics and culture and all, it's just a huge diversion from what's needed, which is economic policies aimed at the vulnerable.
All right. Are there any other questions out there? Feel free to, we've got a couple more minutes. If you have more questions, either raise your hand or type them in the chat. Yao-Chen, go ahead.
Professor Shapiro, another question followed by, I would like to summarize the discussion before as a trade-off between efficiency and stability. Is it a good generalization?
No, I don't think so, because what these populist politicians are pushing is not efficient. Going back to a world of trade wars and protectionism is inefficient. What's needed is free trade, open, open markets, and then compensating the people who are hurt. That's what they should be doing. The companies that do well out of globalization and technology must pay taxes to support the people who do badly and to retrain them and to give them other options. So I think what these populist politicians are pushing is far from efficient.
Thank you.
And then Gavin has
Last question.
Yep. Go ahead, Gavin.
Thank you so much. Hi, Professor Shapiro. Probably you have already addressed this, but do you think that this coronavirus pandemic will create a policy window that basically change the perception of those used to be in the coalition that you just talked about that are opposed Medicare for all, that make them supportive of the policy or make this as a priority during this year's election?
It certainly exposes the problems more bluntly, more sharply than would have been the case before. And I think it creates opportunities to propose the kind of things we're doing and build more political support for them than might otherwise have been the case. So it creates opportunities. Whether Biden is up to it is another matter. But that's what his people should be doing. These are the kinds of things they should be doing. It's the kind of things Trump should be doing. If he wants to be, if Trump got behind some of this stuff, he could expand beyond his virulent base, but he seems incapable of that. Yeah.
All right. Well, obviously we were only able to scratch the surface here. So people who are interested, I do recommend getting the book at the door. And as Professor Shapiro mentioned, we will have another discussion with him later on. I think it's actually next month, not next week.
Next month. Okay.
Yeah. But do look forward to the announcement, and we'll be discussing his other book, another recent book that he's
Responsible Parties.
Responsible Parties. That's right. So thank you again, Professor Shapiro. Yes, that's the book. So look forward to that next month. And
okay.
Of course, yeah. So I'm going to unmute everybody so that they can say thank you to you. And,
okay.
All right.
Wow.
Thank you.